He was the dear leader, a supposed demigod who held 25 million people in his iron grip. His name alone inspired both terror and blind devotion. But before the sprawling military parades, the devastating famine, and the suffocating fear, there was just a lonely little boy who lost everything. How does a child who sees the horrors of war and loses his family become the very monster he should have feared? And the price of that childhood trauma wasn't paid by him. It was paid by an entire nation. To the outside world, Kim Jong-il was a caricature, a reclusive dictator with a bizarre bouffant, oversized sunglasses, and a taste for Hennessy and Hollywood blockbusters. He was the man who let millions of his own people starve while pouring every last resource into a nuclear arsenal. He was the dear leader, a title that felt chillingly disconnected from the suffering his regime inflicted. The cult of personality built around him was so total, it bordered on the divine. State propaganda claimed his birth was marked by a double rainbow and a new star in the heavens. School children sang hymns with the lyric, "Without you, we don't exist." But this carefully crafted myth, like so much of North Korea, was a facade built to hide an uncomfortable truth. The official story was a lie, and the real story is far darker and far more human. To understand the tyrant, you have to go back to the very beginning. You have to strip away the propaganda and find the boy nicknamed Yura, a child born not on a sacred mountain, but in the cold, harsh wilderness of the Soviet Union. A boy whose early years were defined not by miracles, but by a relentless series of traumatic losses. Psychological analysts would later try to label him with a dangerous cocktail of traits: malignant narcissism, extreme paranoia, and sadism. But these clinical terms are just names for wounds that were carved deep into his psyche long before he ever held power. This is the story of how the loneliness and fear of one small boy grew into a monstrous ideology that would hold an entire nation captive. This is the making of Kim Jong-il. The very first fact of Kim Jong-il's life is a lie. Official North Korean history, the mythology taught to every citizen from birth, places his arrival on the sacred slopes of Mount Paektu in 1942. It's a foundational myth, a story tying him directly to the soul of Korea, painting him as a child of destiny. But Soviet records tell a different story. He was born Yuri Ursanovich Kim on February 16, 1941, in a rustic Siberian village called Vyetskoy. His father, Kim Il-sung, wasn't yet the great leader of a nation, but a guerrilla commander in exile, training with the Soviet 88th Special Independent Sniper Brigade after the Japanese drove him out of Korea. His first days were spent not in a mythical log cabin, but in a harsh military camp. This gap between reality and propaganda would become a defining theme of his life. He was born into a world where truth was simply whatever his father said it was. His Russian nickname was Yura. His younger brother, born a few years later, was called Shura. They were the sons of a revolutionary, but for a brief moment, they were just children in a foreign land. That fragile stability was shattered before Yura even turned 5. The family had returned to Korea after World War II, moving into a former Japanese officer's mansion in Pyongyang. It was here that the first tragedy struck. In the summer of 1948, his younger brother Shuri drowned in the garden pond. The official version is a simple, tragic accident, but for decades, darker rumors have persisted, originating from high-level defectors. These unconfirmed accounts claim that the two boys were playing when an older, stronger Yura held his brother's head under the water, perhaps as a cruel game, until Shura drowned. Whether it was a horrific accident he was powerless to stop, or something far more sinister, the outcome was the same. His brother was gone. For a boy of 6 or 7, such an event would be profoundly scarring, embedding a deep sense of loss or a terrible buried guilt. But the trauma was only just beginning. Just a year later, in 1949, the central pillar of his young life collapsed. His mother, Kim Jong-suk, died at the age of 31. She had been a fellow guerrilla fighter who once saved his father's life. The official cause of death is often cited as the hardships she endured during the war. More detailed accounts state she died from complications of an ectopic pregnancy while delivering a stillborn child. One particularly bleak, unconfirmed story alleges she felt so neglected as Kim Il-sung began an affair that she locked herself away during a difficult birth, refused help from doctors, and died alone. For 7-year-old Kim Jong-il, the specifics were a blur. All he knew was that in the span of a single year, he had lost his brother and his mother. This loss, according to many analysts, was the single most critical event in shaping his personality, planting seeds of mistrust, jealousy, and aggression that would define him. He and his little sister, Kim Kyung-hwa, were now effectively orphans, left in the care of nannies. Their father, the great leader, was busy forging a nation and had little time for his grieving children. Then the world exploded. In 1950, the Korean War erupted. To keep them safe, Kim Il-sung sent his children away again, this time to Manchuria in northeastern China. For 3 years, while his home country was being torn apart, Kim Jong-il was once more in exile, separated from his father and his homeland. This experience, meant to protect him, likely felt like another abandonment. It hammered home a terrifying lesson. The world was an unstable, dangerous place where anyone he cared about could be taken from him in an instant. The shadow of war and the ghosts of his family were his constant companions. When the Korean War ended in 1953, a 12-year-old Kim Jong-il returned to a Pyongyang that was mostly rubble. But a new life awaited him in a world of luxury, a gilded cage built for the son of a living god. He was the premier's son, the prince of a new dynasty. But this privilege came at a cost, profound and unending isolation. His father, Kim Il-sung, was everywhere and nowhere at once. He wasn't a father in any normal sense. He was the sun around which the entire nation orbited. Kim Jong-il later complained that after his father remarried in 1963 to a woman named Kim Song-ai, whom he never accepted and refused to call mother, his father had no time for him at all. Their relationship wasn't one of warmth, but of a subject to his king. Some accounts claim that even as a young boy, he would help his father get dressed and put on his shoes, already mimicking the rituals of power. This desperate need for his father's approval, paired with his grandiose position, created the perfect conditions for what some profilers call malignant narcissism. Raised to believe he was special, yet starved of the genuine love that builds a stable self, he developed a massive ego to paper over a deep-seated insecurity. He was, as one former U.S. ambassador described him, a short, unprepossessing kid following a tremendously charismatic, long-tenured father, desperately trying to live up to him. His education was an extension of this grooming. While official biographies say he attended school in Pyongyang, it's more likely he received his early education in China during the war. He later attended the prestigious Kim Il-sung University, graduating with a degree in political economics. But this wasn't an education, it was an indoctrination. He studied Marxist theory and military science, immersing himself in the logic of power. His former tutor later described him as a rather ordinary student, who made few friends and was shy, often blushing when put on the spot. This meek exterior, however, hid a personality that was anything but ordinary. His isolation was becoming a core part of his character, reflecting what psychologists would later identify as schizoid and schizotypal traits, a detachment from social relationships. It's claimed he had only one real friend his entire life, a difficult assertion to prove, but one that speaks to his profound loneliness. As he grew into an adolescent, his behavior began to reveal darker currents. He developed a deep hatred for the United States, which he saw as the imperialist occupier of his country's southern half. The war that had sent him into exile had also given him an enemy, a target for all the fear and anger simmering since childhood. He also began to show a manipulative and capricious nature. His sister-in-law later recalled that he could be nice one moment, but his fury could make the windows shake the next. His former personal chef noted he might treat his staff like friends, then scream at them without warning. This volatility was the hallmark of a person whose inner world was in constant turmoil. He never accepted his stepmother, Kim Jong-il, or her children. He saw his half-siblings as a threat to his inheritance of power. He was fiercely protective of his full sister, Kim Kyung-hwa, the only other person who had shared his early trauma, but he treated his stepmother with cold distance. This fear of being replaced likely intensified his paranoia. Once he finally took power, he completely marginalized his stepmother and her family, an act of revenge that seemed to spring directly from his childhood resentment. The lonely prince was learning that in his world, power was the only real security. In July 1961, Kim Jong-il officially joined the Korean Workers' Party. This wasn't just a career move, it was his entry into the only family that mattered, the only structure that offered the absolute security he craved. He rose quickly, not through charisma, but through a meticulous, obsessive devotion to the system. His first major test came in 1967 with the Kapsan faction incident, the last real challenge to Kim Il-sung's rule. At just 26, Kim Jong-il was given a key role in the investigation, and he pursued it with chilling zeal, helping to purge anyone who questioned his father. This was his chance to prove his loyalty. He was no longer the shy boy his tutor remembered. He was becoming an instrument of his father's will. His most crucial appointment came in 1973, when he was put in charge of propaganda and agitation. It was here that he became the chief architect of his father's personality cult, and by extension his own. The child whose life began with a lie about his birthplace now controlled the factory of lies for the entire nation. He understood the power of a narrative because he'd lived his entire life inside one. Now he would be its author. He poured his energy into film, his great obsession. His personal library reportedly held over 20,000 videos. But this was more than a hobby. It was a propaganda laboratory. His obsession became so extreme that in 1978, he ordered the kidnapping of South Korean film director Shin Sang-ok and his actress wife, Choi Yoon-hee, forcing them to make movies for him. It was a brazen act that revealed the core of his psychology, a narcissistic belief that the world existed to serve his desires, and a paranoid conviction that he could only trust what he directly controlled. This paranoia wasn't just a personality quirk, it was the organizing principle of his political life. The traumas of his childhood had convinced him the world was a fundamentally hostile place. He saw conspiracies and traitors everywhere. He reportedly engineered a system where officials were forced to constantly watch and criticize one another to prove their loyalty to him. By 1980, he was officially designated his father's successor. As Kim Il-sung aged, Kim Jong-il's control became nearly absolute. When his father died of a heart attack in 1994, his ascension was complete. But he inherited a country on the brink of collapse. The fall of the Soviet Union had cut off critical aid, and a series of natural disasters and horrific mismanagement plunged North Korea into a devastating famine. Over the next few years, estimates suggest that anywhere from several 100,000 to over 2 million people died of starvation. Faced with this crisis, known as the Arduous March, Kim Jong-il's paranoia went into overdrive. His response was twofold. Internally, he tightened his grip, expanding political prison camps and unleashing security services to crush any dissent. He ruled through fear, a direct manifestation of the sadism that psychological profiles had identified. Externally, his paranoia became a twisted form of statecraft. He poured the country's few resources into the military and nuclear weapons. This wasn't just for defense, it was blackmail. By creating a credible nuclear threat, he forced the world, especially the United States, to give him the aid needed to keep his regime afloat. It was the madman theory in practice. Act so unpredictably that your enemies would rather placate you than confront you. The world saw an evil genius or a lunatic. In reality, he was a deeply insecure man who learned the only way to get the world's attention was to threaten to destroy it. From a Siberian military camp to a gilded palace in Pyongyang, the life of Kim Jong-il was a study in contrasts, of immense privilege and profound emotional poverty, of absolute power and crippling insecurity. The boy who lost his brother and mother grew into a man who trusted no one. The child sent into exile by war learned that the world was a place of constant threat. The son who desperately craved the approval of a distant, godlike father developed a malignant narcissism, a need for adoration so vast he demanded it from an entire nation. The story of his rise is the story of trauma left to fester. The helplessness he felt as a child was sublimated into a lifelong obsession with control. The abandonment he experienced was transformed into a deep-seated paranoia that saw enemies in every shadow. These weren't just personal failings. They became the pillars of his state. His paranoia became North Korea's isolationism. His narcissism became the state's personality cult. His cruelty became the operating system of his gulags. He successfully built one of the world's largest armies and developed nuclear weapons. Not as a sign of strength, but as the ultimate defense mechanism of a man living in perpetual fear. He lived in opulence while his people starved, a final, tragic testament to a man who likely never received empathy and so had none to give. In the end, the myth of the dear leader, born under a double rainbow, was just that, a myth. The reality was a man forever haunted by the ghosts of his past. The tragedy of Kim Jong-il is not just his own. It is the tragedy of a nation held hostage by the ghost of a lonely boy, a boy who built a fortress of fear around himself and trapped 25 million people inside it with him. If you want to understand more about the hidden dynamics of the world's most secretive regimes, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. What part of Kim Jong-il's story do you find the most shocking? Let us know in the comments below.